integrated together, how integrated are they? Like, do they have their own, like, government, their own president, or their own court? And move on to the second one, the 1990s debate. They are a debate as well, but it is not an important debate. And the 1970s debate, they are called Euroclerosis. And Euroclerosis, it refers to the economic stagnation that results from the excessive regulation, market rigidities, and overly generous welfare policy. And some people, they say the 1990s debate is focused mainly on, no, it is a revival of protectionism or neo-mercantilism, but the debate is focused mainly on integration. And to understand regionalism, the author, he said that we have to understand it exogenously and endogenously. So exogenous, it means outside in, and endogenous means inside out. So how do we understand outside in? So exogenous, they argue that the globalization caused the regionalization, while endogenous, they argue that regionalization caused globalization. And exogenous, it is a product of recent debate, while endogenous, it is more concerned with functionalism and neo-functionalism, because they believe that the role of non-state actor and territory identity is starting to getting more important. However, the study of globalization nowadays, it is not static, because many researchers, they have their own term to coin for the regionalization, but there are three current regionalization that focuses on making of new political landscape, expanding cast of actors, and many variety of dimensions that focus on security, development, and trade, and etc. So I give the floor to Chai Long.
Thank you, Tom, for giving the floor again. Now moving to my part about the multi-dimension nationality and pluralism of regional phenomenon, both in Europe and the rest of the world. And and, the, and in this case, they illustrate about the outcome of the number of revitalized or new theory and approach to regionalism. Also, regionalism is one of the subjects that study over the last decade of theory exploration in the field. According to some edit volumes of so the bombs, and so he have write about the theory of regionalism with with variety of institutionalism, security complex theory, and a variety of constructivists. Also, he has an approach to new regionalism, such as world order approach, new regionalism approach, and regional building approach. Move to the next one is wrote by. Cha, do you hear me? Hello, Cha.
Yes. Yeah. Yes,
I
too.
think
Okay,
I
go
think
ahead.
the microsim allowed me. Uh, Moving to the next part is about political economy of regionalism, wrote by Mansfield and Milner. He highlighted about a variety of neo-realist, neo-liberal institution theory, and new trade theory, and new institutionalism. Also, uh, the last one is about the Peter and Amitiev. He regarding to his theoretical innovation. He studied about regionalism in Asia. His work is about the innovation of the study of regionalism in Asia, but also his work is mostly comparative regionalism. In that time, comparative regionalism has one of the most significant threats in contemporary study of regionalism. About the old and new regionalism, according to Sabert, he said that it has been tension, debate, and much confusion about the old and new regionalism. And oh no, I forgot. His name is Hetne. I confused this one. And he is one of the famous scholar, and so he associated with that label, and so he stated that after 2 more decades, no regionalism has been distinct or different and has lost its meaning because that the originalism or originalism theory they approach they were all concerned about the peace and tend to see nation state as the problem rather than the solution. And about the new regionalism, he said that now they focus about social science specialization, about European study, comparative politics, international economic, international relations, and international political economy. So after that, he has after that he to sum up this idea. He said that it may be relevant to identify and continue and discontinue. It means that some people they defer to the old one, and some people they change to other one from understanding. Bum, bum. One shift in thinking and related to one thinking related to the conceptualization and understanding of vision is focused about the time of early debates over regional integration, about a large amount of research capacity and trying to define the region like scientifically. Also, in that time, when there are a large amount of opinion were advanced and regarding to the mutual interdependence, such as economic, political, social variable, historical, and culture and ethnic bounds. So when the result of that conceptualize and understand our region is not is basically come to an end because most scholar they engage and they engage in the temporary debate agree that because there are no natural or scientific region. So the definition of regionalism is different, is in the particular problem or question under the investigate of observation. Because of this, scholar try to solve the problem by focusing on regional organization and regional economic framework. Can you move to the next slide now? A difference between mainstream and rationalist and problem solving and critical and constructivist. In this case, they regarding to the conceptualize and treatment of region. Mainstream theory, mainstream early theory, they focus about the federalism, functionalism, and neo-functionalism. Normally, they take region as the pre-given, and they often find them as particular interstate or policy driving framework. After that, they consolidate with reason to the early debate of region, and they believe that they can identify through material structure and formal regional organization. In that case, constructivists and post-constructivists they accuse in this perspective. They said that regions are not best understood in terms of regional intergovernmental organization because they view that all regions are socially constructed and political constructed. They emphasize that because of political answer, they perceive or and they impart they they translate the idea of a region or a region and regionness and region building. So according to this idea of constructivist and post-structivist, they said that there are no natural region. They said that all regions are at least potential with diverse in character or content with unclear territory margin. Like teacher used to explain you before, like depend on the political of that country. They define like Japan, they define Indo-Pacific, so their boundary and territory, something like that. In the book, they refer to heterogeneous, unclear territory margins. Until that, since 1990s, the study of informal regionalism has increased not only about state relation, but also informality among the people in the region. Meaning that the book they has the emphasis about the soft power and informal regionalization. They focus about the non-state actor because non-state actor they have been begin operated at regional level and like they, for example, like business interests, multinational, and they are not only operative in the global sphere, but they tend to create pattern of economic activity, like regional production system in East and Southeast Asia and informal market exchange in Africa. Informal market exchange means like black market. So the book mentioned that like non-state actors, they refer to civil society because they said that so civil society is not is also the impact instead of an evidence of regional level around the world. Why the scholar is not thinking about this, and they think that about civil society is not really important. They focus about only the state, something like that. That's all for my part. I give the floor to my classmate.
So this part is the problem of Eurocentrism. So what is Eurocentrism? Eurocentrism is a worldwide view that is centered on Western civilization or biased view that favor it over non-Western civilization. So the perspective of Eurocentrism, there are many comparative of regionalism with Europe. With Europe's centered view, regionalism in Europe is considered multi-dimensional and highly institutionalized. However, the regionalism outside of Europe is considered as weakly institutionalized and reduced to either an economy or security-related phenomenon. So there is Alex and Ben Rosamond, who are the scholars focusing on European integration. They argue that most of the recent European Union scholars describe the EU as nascent, is if unconventional, the party in its own right with no intervention from the other. They also exploring some issues such as Europeanization and the EU own political system. However, they also encountered with certain intellectual parochialism that kept them from understanding any deeper of the EU as political system. Next slide. So, moreover, the two scholars also argue that the notion of EU is sui generis. Sui generis means that uniqueness or all on its own kind. This led to another view that EU it resembles either federal nation state or other regionalist project around the world. They even compare EU with federal system in advanced industrial state, the United States. And for regionalism, EU is a region with diversity because there is no consensus on a single EU mode of governance, but a series of different interpretations of EU. This means that EU is potentially influenced on the broader regionalism literature. From this perspective of EU, it is evidentially that European integration theory and practice affected the study of regionalism in all corners of the world, including the Asia. There are two perspectives toward European integration theory and practice in the field of regionalism, which are one strands of thinking tend to elevate European integration. Next slide on. And the other one is considerably less convinced of the advantages of Eurocentric theory and generalization. These two perspectives is neither improve the theory of regionalism because it reflects the teleological prejudice as it explains deviation from the standard European case, meaning that the regional organization is defined in terms of EU style institutionalization. And moreover, many comparison and generalization are lack of sensitivity to compare the region because it departs from the European context and European welfare state. For example, non-Western regionalism does not occupy equal position in the current world order and consisting of radically different state forms. So what is the problem of Eurocentrism? The problem is that the Eurocentrism bias lie in the way that underlying assumption and understanding about the nature of regionalism that Eurocentrists want to shape the other regional organization, but each organization are not the same like EU because like I have mentioned above, as each region occupy unequal position in the current world order and consisting of radical different state form. And after this, the new regionalism is being found, which was making with radical and postmodern variants. And the scholar of this even tried to avoid and challenge Eurocentrism. So that's it for my part. I would like to give the floor to the next presenter.
So good evening again. So the part we talk about the theoretical perspective on informal and formal regionalism. So before we move into our explanation, I would like to give a quick definition about region and regionalism. So we have studied the region is the social political construction with the wide concept, metaphors, and the practice determining how the region is defined, who is included or who is excluded. The more common example is the European Union. So the EU began with the 6 member states and now it increased to the 27 countries. And the key term about the regionalism, we refer to the economic, political, or the social cooperation under the purpose of enhanced regional integration. So this move to our content. This part will examine the theoretical perspective on informal and formal regionalization. But what is the informal and what is the formal? So here are the definition. The informal regionalization here, I refer to the kind of informal process with an non-codified series of events based upon the mutual benefit. And the example here, as you can see, which is ASEAN, ASEAN Way, and ASEAN Plus C, but why? So as ASEAN is the institution in our regional. So it involving consensus decision and making the decision through informal agreement and the limited commitment by state. And it's strong adherence to the norm and the non-interference in state internal affairs. And for the informal one, I refer informal regionalism. I refer to the formal process. Kinda the official policy that had a legal treaty, the written treaty or constitution. So the example here is the EU. But why? EU has developed, has considered other formal regionalism because of its formal bureaucratic, legalistic institution, which including the cost and the vote procedure and so on. So move to our next slide, please. This slide will examine the theory. As you can see, we had from the part one that the scholars try to identify the term originalism and even try to examine how regionalism can be effective to the state. So, by the way, there are so many scholars who try to identify based on the different type of region that can be informal or informal religion, that it can be the most functional, instrumental, and effective to rule or to govern based on the distance theory. So back to our mainstream concept, which is the classical theory. I focus on the functionalism and neo-functionalism. The state interact with others to pursue interests and lead to design and to pursue their interests. Actually, state they interact with the non-state actor to promote the commerce. The example here is the non-governmental is I think WTO and the neo-functionalism. They emphasize the deliberate design of institutions which are seen as the most effective way to solving the common problem. So we can see the creation of a genre that aim to prevent the conflict and seek for the consensus on the issue and follow the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of its member from the outsider of its inner religion. So move to our next slide. It also focuses on institutionalism, but here we divide into three, which are neoliberal institutionalism, the rationalist, and the neorealism. So the first one is neoliberal institutionalism. They are the idea of anarchist system which state are largely rational and unitary actor. But anyway, institution for the state is still matter because the institution not only exists to tie the connection between state and non-state or whatever, but it also provides state with the good product or the unlimited benefit as well. This is what Karen has said, and move to the rationalism that have been stated by Archaya and Johnson in 2007, that they state that institution can be analyzed through both of dependent and independent variable. And the study is beyond the rationalist to emphasize that institutional design engage in constructivist and other approach. Like it was hidden under the formal and informal rule identity as well as a norm or the ideology of the institution. So the last one is neorealism. This one was emphasized by inspired by Robert Gibbon, that the structure of feature of anarchist system with specific on the state behavior. I would like to explain more. The system is anarchy, but which makes state look upon other Russian angles toward competition and conflict. So state enter to the competition and conflict to pursue their own interests. But when the distribution of the power is starting to open for the cooperation, under what circumstance or what sector, especially in order to counter the power of another state or group of states within or outside or inside, the proposition of the realist is hegemon. That the hegemon can stimulate the emergence of regional cooperation and regional institutions in the widest way. So the example is to make it easy to understand is the hegemon can either confront its internal or external obstacle and reward the tendency toward the complacent, or it can attack the rising of the power. The example is that maybe the U.S. after the World War II or in the era of Cold War. So I think that's all my point. I would like to give my floor to another presenter.
Hello everyone. here I'm continue from Mùi Wood part, and as you all have listened to Mùi Wood explanations already, so here I would like to continue from her part, starting with the point that Barry Busan challenged neorealism, which the definition is like neorealism is the structural features of the anarchical system, which specifically focus on state behavior. So he challenged the neorealism and also argued that the power theories underestimate the importance of the regional level in international relations. So moving on to the next slide. To understand why he thinks like that, next slide, please. So to understand why he thinks like that, I would like to introduce you about his theory, which is like the regional security complex theory, which founded by himself and along with a contributor whose name is Ole Weber. And the theory is defined as a set of states whose security and power perceptions and concern linked to one another, and that their national security problem cannot be analyzed or resolved apart from one another. Also, Busan's security complexes were seen as a miniature anarchist. So miniature here means mini or it's small. So it means that in overall it means small anarchy, something like that. So and he also shared the conventional neo-realist convictions that saying strong states form strong and mature regions, while weak states tend to create conflicts and immature regions, or consider that they do not form a regions at all. And for instance, the EU and Africa. So EU is formed by strong states and became a mature regions, while American integrations, failed to form a regions. Or in other words, we can say American Union, but it's failed to form a regions. So in collaborations with the Ole Weber, Busan has revived the regional security complex theory, his theory, in order to consider to switch to a particular constructivist approach, and also like move away from state-centric assumptions. Therefore, there is a new definitions of his theory, which is regional security complex. The new definition is it is a set of units whose processes of securitizations, desecuritization, or both are linked to one another, and that their security problem cannot be analyzed apart from one another. And he also argued that the constructivist approach is necessary in order to keep the concept of security coherence while adding new security sectors. And those new security sectors are economic, environmental, and societal sector, like adding up on the traditional military and political sector. So therefore, the new formulation of his theory allows a deeper analysis of non-state actors and informality that the state, do not think of much. So in other words, we can say that regions mostly, they states form regions like they mostly focus on military and political, but here in Busan's new formulation of his theory, focus on non-state actors that introduce economic, environment, or also society. So moving on to the next slide. Um, Down, next slide, please. Down, next slide. So can anyone still hear me presenting?
Just go ahead, Srina. Yeah, without a slide.
Oh,
I
okay.
I
Yes,
think
sure.
I'm slow.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, sir. Um, the view that in this slide, the view that regions must not be like taken for granted, nor be analyzed as regional organization, is emphasized in type of constructivist and post-structuralist scholarship. So, as Joseph pointed out, he's also one of the scholar stating that rather than seek for a difficult objective criterion for defining a regions. One should treat regions as emergent, or in other words, treat them as a strong, socially constituted phenomena. So for constructivists and reflectivists, regions are not taken for granted. They are not seen as natural, organic, essential, or material objects, but rather as a dynamic setting for social interactions with a particular focus on the process through which they are becoming and the way that they are constructed or reconstructed by reflective actors because there are no natural regions or interests. So the regions are heterogeneous, which means that there's a diverse content in the regions. So in this context, it must be noted that in recent years, social constructivism has also gained a more important place in the study of European integration. This line of thinking has entered the discussion on European integration mainly as a spillover from the discipline of IR. The social constructivist approach in the European debate emphasizes the constitutive function of structure and agency, and also pays attention on the role of ideas, values, norms, and identities in the social constructions of Europe, which also in turn draw attentions away from the formality of the EU. So moving on to the next slide. Um, Next slide, please. So this theoretical review show that the debate on formal, informal regionalism is both expanding and strong. However, a new definition of formality and informality compete with old definition, like resulting in a large number of overlapping and sometimes competing like to capture a similar phenomena, like such as top down versus top bottom up regionalism, de jure versus de facto regionalizations, state-led regionalism versus market and society-induced regionalism, or in other words, we can say market-led regionalization, and hard versus soft regionalism, and last one is official versus unofficial or informal regionalism. So here, therefore, in overall, we can say that like therefore, it is more like consistent to like define regionalism as the policy or project or the cognitive idea of forming regions, and along with like the explanation that I have read along there. And also, here's the end of my presentation, and I would like to give the floor to Praveen, and he will explain more about informal and formal regionalism, and we will go deeply furthermore. Thank you.
Um, Thank you, Senor. So this part we talk about formality and informality in Asia and comparative regionalism. So um, as you know that up until now there's still no consensus on how to define as a region because the meaning of regionalism has always changed of what should be included and excluded of subregions as well as which dimension should we look into. Uh, Even though as in regionalism has such problematic uh, large literature of its regionalism place emphasis on ASEAN. The reason for literature to be mostly about ASEAN is because ASEAN is seemed to be one among the few international organizations that is sustainable, and further, ASEAN from the start is the product of political elites with the goal of raison d'etre, which means the of ASEAN, which means that about defensive war against communist expansion. However, the end of Cold War ASEAN shifted its position from against communism to economic development and regional security. New debate about new scholarship, new debate about regionalism also arises since that it's focused on collective identity formation and informal, or they call it soft regionalism. So this new scholarship concern about the relationship between formality and informality in regional organization. That being said, that the scholarship look into non-legalistic style of decision making in Asia and the lack of transferring of her national sovereignty to supranational authority. So this type of styles include informal gathering, working groups, and advisory groups that can be found in Asian, as in regional forum, uh, as a Europe meeting or ASEM or NSM plus 3. You can find this in this group. You may have learned from year 2 that this informal style of decision making is referred to as ASEAN boy, or in other words, they call it soft institutionalism. Uh, scholar Scholar Achaya and Johnston in their Crafting Cooperation, Regional International Institution in Comparative Perspective, uh, they put it that the main difference between formal and formal informality of Asian institutions and formality of other regions is that ASEAN states design ASEAN or this institution to be informal. Please move on to the next slide. Down, please. Okay, thank you. So, no, please move back. Okay, thank you. So, you should keep in mind that many studies compare ASEAN regionalism to uh, European Union, that some even suggested that ASEAN regionalism is looser and informal, and some studies even go further to even suggest that ASEAN regionalism is underdeveloped. However, it is problematic to come to this conclusion because this kind of analysis is biased toward a particular way of formality over other alternatives. In this case, it's European Union. So instead of raising European model as the preferred regionalism, it is important to acknowledge that cooperation is very contested. It's a very contested process that will produce different and equal legitimate outcome the same. Uh, this is it from my part. Thank you.
Now let's move to the final part. So to sum up, regionalism has become an academic growth industry in a number of social science disciplines and subdisciplines like European study, comparative politics, international economy, geography, international relations, security study, and international political economy. Since there are many different academic specializations, the term of regionalization also defined based on the different thing to different people and also increasing the number of theory of regionalism as well. Um, Within the different regional specialization, there is also the fragmentation and a lack of communication between scholars from various theoretical standpoint as well. Therefore, we can solve by the tension and different illustrate that the regional phenomenon uh, is multi-dimensional that need for a certain degree of analytical and theoretical eclecticism, but also greater conceptual clarity. About the research field of comparative regionalism, mostly was focused on the former regional organization and institution that follow from the dominant of rationalist and problem-solving theoretical perspective. Since the late 1990s, it has led a more pluralistic and heterogeneous theory, uh, uh, theoretical theory and conceptualization of region that increased emphasis on constructivist and reflectivist theorizing. Accordingly, there is a stronger focus on the soft informal regionalism as well as an intensified debate regarding the various ways that state, market, and civil society actors relate and come together in different formal and informal patterns of regionalism and regionalization. Within the use of comparison is underdeveloped in the field of regionalism since many scholars specialize in a particular region, so that the concept and theories mostly develop based on their own region. Overall, this chapter reflects that there is a considerable scope for increased cross-fertilization between different region debates, and comparison should not be limited to contemporary regions. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your great attention.
Okay, thank you, Group number one, yeah, for your interesting, presentation, on chapter one, yeah, about theories of regionalism. Okay, so now I would like to give the floor to the audiences to ask questions or to give comments. Okay, please.
Ciao, I do have question.
Go ahead, Moniron.
Yes, so thanks to the group that provide us with fruitful information about theory of regionalism. So I have a quick and simple questions. Like I heard the group has mentioned about the exogenous perspective that has developed primarily in the recent debate, and I just want to know how exogenous perspective play like important role in today's world or recent debate, and especially new regionalism. And it would be better if you can provide us with the real example of exogenous perspective that apply in the new regionalism. And I think
Okay.
that's all from me. Yes.
Okay, thank you,
Back to the
Moniron.
group.
Okay, group one, you have any response to Moniron's question?
Hello, Moniron. I'm sorry. Due to my internet is a bit slow. Like, can you like summarize the question again? I know you want to ask about the new regionalism and the perspective from the.
Okay, so my question in short, which means that I heard somebody talk about the exogenous perspective that has developed, like in recent debate, like in today's world, like it is mostly well known, and I just want to know how exogenous perspective develop in new regionalism. Like, do you catch up with my question?
Okay. So let me clarify. So you want to ask how do the new regionalism
Okay, group one, can you get the question?
it's not clearly, sir.
Okay, so let me put like this. So how can you use the Siraco debate in the past and apply it to the new regionalism in the modern day? So how can you do that?
How can we take the argument from the past and apply in the present?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that back to the 1950, 1960 until 1970s, there's a lot of Siraco debate, right, on regionalism, right? So how can we apply those Siraco perspective to the new regionalism? Okay, so I give you 1 minute to prepare for your answer. Okay, it's time, and try to focus on the exogenous perspective. Okay, group 1.
Hello, Chuck. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry, Chuck. The internet is very kind of bad today. I'm very sorry.
Okay, the other group member can also contribute to answering the question. Okay, go ahead, group 1.
I got the idea of Mani Roger. She just texted me. So she want to ask why the outsider play the role in regionalization, and she want to refer to the new regionalism or the exogenous, which means we have to understand it outside in. So at the time of the debate, it is the product of recent debate, because at that time there is an intense, like the the fall of the Soviet Union, like sparked the intensification of the globalization. So the world start talking with each other. The communist bloc start to go free, and they start to talk with another country in the world. So that time, the perception they also change as well. So that is why it is a product of recent debate. And from that time on, when we define regionalism, we we have to look it into two ways. That is my answer to her.
Okay, Nirwan, is Udam answering your question?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, I think we can talk more about that, right? I think back to my question, right? Back to my question. So how I think I still go back to my question, right? So there was so many satirical debate, right? Since the 1950s, about regionalism, about institution, about regional integration, right? From Western and from Asian perspective. So in your opinion, so which theory is more convincing to study the regionalism in the Asia Pacific? What do you think?
Is it for other group members?
Yes. So try to identify one theory. So why the theory is so important, to explain, the regionalism, right, in the Asia Pacific. Yeah, because I think some people, they do not, like the Western, way of explaining, right, the institution, the regionalism, right, because they refer to, Eurocentrism, right? So it's a kind of biased idea, right? That why we need to take, the Western, idea. Why we need to focus on, the European or Western international relation, right? Theory and approaches to study, ASEAN or to study, the other institution, right, in the Asia, right? But particularly the Asia Pacific, right? Yeah, therefore I think the professor, Amitabh Acharya and the professor Barry Busan, I think in 2010. So back to 10 years ago, trying to, provide more perspective about IR, right, from Asian perspective, right? What we call Asian, international relation, right? So in your opinion, right? So among those theoretical, perspectives, theoretical debates, so which theory is more convincing, right? To explain or to analyze the regionalism or regionalization, right, in Asia, right, and particularly the Asia Pacific.
Teacher. So regarding to
Okay, Darwin.
yes, so regarding to your question, from my perspective, to study about ASEAN regionalism, one theory is we should consider that fit best is constructivist because in uh, ASEAN historical development is shaped quite differently from European Union. So, in order to understand this ASEAN regionalism, we should look into how each ASEAN state perceive regionalism and why they pursue regionalism in a certain way. So, constructivist and post-structuralist approach explain best for this, like empirical empiricism. They take a region not for granted, but conservativists they take this for not for granted.
You mean constructivism?
Constructivism and post-structuralist approach.
Okay, so how can you explain, the institutionalism or regionalism in the Asia Pacific, from a constructivism perspective? Can you analyze?
So regarding ASEAN, from constructivist point of view, can see ASEAN leaders during the time of the creation did not wanted so much to create, but due to their perceived to the threat to communism spread and their sense of survival together, they have they had the same perspective. So they come together in Bangkok in to discussing and create ASEAN in and you can see in Bangkok Declaration. So from this point of view, constructivists explain how ASEAN leaders perceive the threat. They have the same view to the threat of communism and internal threat from communism as well, teacher.
Is it because I think I think it's something confusing, right, between constructivism and neoliberalism, right? So when you apply neoliberalism, to the creation, right, of the ASEAN, in 1967, definitely, right, they focus on the external factor. They focus on the regional anarchy, right? Couple, with the communist movement, right? The 4 ASEAN, member, 5 ASEAN fathers, take external factor into consideration before we come up with, the way that they can, govern, the region and prevent the region from the spread of communism, right? So I think some a little bit confusing, right? But it's okay, right? It's okay. Okay, I think go back to the slide a little bit. You mentioned that ASEAN is the informal regionalism, right? Yeah, I think one of the slide, right, you say that ASEAN is the informal regionalism. So why do you think that ASEAN is the informal institution in the Asia Pacific?
Regarding to this question, ASEAN states they are referred to as informal and non-legalistic institution because we may look back into historical development because ASEAN states have a big problem with their have big problem with to make some concession of their sovereignty, so they focus much on the commitment to sovereignty and their territorial integrity and non-interference principle that embedded in the ASEAN Charter. And yes, sure.
Okay, I think at that time, ASEAN Charter, has not been, adopted by the ASEAN member, right? So the book was written, in 2000, published, in 2012, 6 years right, before the adoption of the ASEAN chapters. And even, the article written by Amitabh Acharya and Johnston, right, in 2007, right, does not capture, how ASEAN, evolved into the formal organization, right, in the region. So currently, I think ASEAN have a codified, ASEAN chapter. Yeah, that institutional ASEAN, become the formal organization, right, in the Southeast Asia. ចឹងសភៅពុំនេះគឺយ៉ាងនេះក៏ទៅ2012ណា ASEAN tag ASEAN actually institutionalized, right, itself, and many scholar even regard ASEAN, right, as the only only formal, right, regionalism or legal, right, institution. So even though ASEAN have the traditional principle, right, what we call ASEAN way, right, ASEAN way to regulate the behavior, right, of the ASEAN member state, right. Okay, thank you, group number 1. And do you have any other question, everyone, for group number 1? Okay, Danae, please.
Yeah, so I have a question related to informal regionalism. So, Bong Win, from your perspective, could you please briefly explain on how non-legalistic style decision-making impact to the regional organization?
Okay, thank you, Danae. So to answer this question, I want to ask you back. Can you name one ASEAN achievement ASEAN achievement so far that ASEAN has done together and have some good achievements so far? Can you name one?
Is it ASEAN Center for Biodiversity Index found in 2005?
Excuse me, ASEAN, you mean ASEAN Center for the Biodiversity?
Yes.
Okay. Um, that's good. So to answer to your question, how non-legalistic way of ASEAN making decision impact the regional ASEAN itself, we can look into two ways. ASEAN deal specifically in a way when they deal with non-sensitive matter, they can uh, make some achievement. For example, like you said, the ASEAN Center by the biodiversity, like it deal with the sharing about biodiversity in ASEAN and the sharing of this benefit. So in even though it's non-legalistic and ASEAN based on ASEAN way, and in the sense that it's non-legalistic and informal, they in uh, like it's a non-sensitive matter. They can make some achievements, so they can make consider and they create the center, for example. But for ASEAN, in the non-legalistic way, it's also a problem to ASEAN to make some decision on sensitive matter. Like, for example, South China Sea and recent military coup in Myanmar. ASEAN stays silent because the constraint put in ASEAN itself, the ASEAN way, then non-interference and respect of sovereignty. So we can look in a two way. ASEAN is not like some say that ASEAN is a useless organization, but that's not true. But it's also true to some extent if you look into the sensitive and non-sensitive matter. Am I answer your question?
Yes, Bon, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that's true, right? That's true. So, sometimes ASEAN, is in that amount, right, between sensitive and non-sensitive issue. Yeah, I agree with you that, in the context of the South China Sea, ASEAN, I think is trying to, codify, the conduct, right, of party in the South China Sea, right? So, Cambodia, did a great job, back to 2012, to, produce a document that's, non-legal document, right? That, what we call a declaration, right, of the party, the conduct party, right, in the South China Sea. And until now, it's almost 10 years, right? 10 years, to codify, the conduct party, right, in the South China Sea. So hopefully, next year, under the championship Cambodia, right, ASEAN can, prove, more relevant, in terms of security protection, right, in the region, particularly, how to deal with, the bigger power, how to deal with China, right, in the South China Sea, between China and the climate state, right, as in climate states. Okay, so other question from the audiences? Yeah, គ្នាយើងមានសំណួរទៀតអត់តកតងជាមួយនឹងមេរៀនហ្នឹងណា Okay, so I have some observation, regarding your presentation. So I can go a little bit outside the chapter. So we have some more perspective, right? More insight, into the regionalism, right? Yeah, particularly in Europe, right? Yeah, of course, back to the 1950 and 1960, even in the 1920, there are a lot of scholar, a lot of researcher, a lot of academia, they focus on the European integration, right? Because they have undergone many conflict, many war, right? Many confrontation, many competition, right? Or the separation, the nationalism, right? And when have caused a lot of damages to the European region, right? And a lot of scholars, they focus on, federation. It's a kind of, more structure, formal, right? Integration, like what United States doing now, right? Federal government and, state governor, right? So European Union, in the early stage, they plan to do so, but they could not do that, right? So that they had to build the strategic trust, among the member, right, among the countries in the Europe, right? We will go back a little bit, right, to the, a little bit, to the past, right? Many hundred years ago, right? And later on, some scholar even, focus on the functionalism. So they look at how, the regional grouping can, function, to protect, security, to maintain the regional order, and to achieve the economic prosperity, right? So later on, they some scholar even look at the neo, functionalism, right? It's just like a spilling, spill over a fact that the low politics can be, become, important, right, to promote, the the security, the high politics, right, issue, right? So this is how European Union, right, developed from the early 1950s and gradually become, supranational organization like what EU is now, right? So they have very deep integration, right? And they use the common, currency within the European Union, right? Union. So that's all. This is how many theory involved, right? Involved, and how many approach used by many scholar, many researcher, right? In the past, and most of them are Western, right? Western. Yeah, therefore the Asian some Asian scholar, so they are not really happy, right? The way that the European scholar explain, right, the regionalism, right? So I mentioned two important scholars, Amitao Acharya and also the Barry, right? Busan, this scholar, co-author many articles, even the book, right? About the Asian, international relation, right? Trying to use different kind of approaches, including, a variety of, the mixture, right, of a theory and approaches, to look at, how ASEAN countries, cooperate, how they, promote, regional grouping, how they institutionalize the regional institution, right, in the region, right? Okay, go back to the past. Nhưng mà khang khỏi tiếng ấy, how the series develop, right, from time to time. Nhưng mà từក្នុងឆ្នាំ1948. So what happened, right, in Europe in 1648? Everyone? So what happened, right?
Treaty of Westphalia.
Yeah, the Treaty of Westphalia, right? The Treaty of Westphalia. So even before that, the Western, country, regard themselves as the Christian Empire, right? Christian Empire, some feudal society, feudal system, right? In European country. So I think the idea of two-sided is quite convincing. At the time, the strong do what they can do, and the weak suffer what they must. Yes, bigger state, invaded, the weaker state, right? And the weaker state, trying to survive. They're trying to, build a coalition. They're trying to build alliances. They try to bandwagon, be the bigger power, in order to survive, right? Survive in the kind of situation. They compete, right? They fight each other, right? I think for many years, right? Starting from mainly from the 1618 until the 1647, right? 47. So it's already 30 years, right? 30-year war, right? Among the Western empire, right? In the past, and finally they produced two important documents, right? Two important treaties, called a Treaty of Westphalia, right? To create a new state system, right? ចឹងគាត់ចាប់ផ្ដើមប្រកាសបញ្ជាប្រព័ន្ធមួយទៅខាត់ប្រព័ន្ធរដ្ឋហើយ European state system, right? After the Westphalia Treaty, right, in the 1648, right? So many empire now become the sovereign state. So they have a certain boundary, right? Boundary. But there are so many problems of the Westphalian Treaty, right? So the treaty allow country to create the coalition, to create the the group, right? The group to create the alliances, right? In order to survive. So in that kind of system, many countries they focus on the balance of power, right? Balance of power. Yeah, as a certain state, right? They need to they use balance of power as a guiding principle, right? In the international politics, right? In the regional politics. ចឹងអីក៏ដោយគឺតកតងមួយ balance of power. If you are weak, you will be invaded, right? By the strongest state, right? If you are therefore many countries in Europe prevent any state from becoming the hegemon, right, in the region. Yeah, meaning that they prevent any state becoming, right, from becoming a threat to many other states, right, in Europe, right? So what we call they call it, right, they call it as the laissez-faire balance of power, right? យើងធ្លាប់ឮពាក្យថា laissez-faire economy, right? And that the laissez-faire balance of power is the power politics, right, in Europe, right, in the state system, right? Um, from the 1648, right? So they are clever, right? They create that kind of system, to set a boundary, to set the sovereignty, right, for many countries, right, in Europe, right? Except the country outside Europe, right? So they are not part of Westphalian Treaty, right? Westphalian system, right? Except China and Japan. So these two countries are the powerful empire in Asia, and one or not they have to include those two empires, right, into the state system, right, or European country. ជាងគាត់ include ប្រទេសចិនជាមួយនឹងអធិរាជជប៉ុន right ក្នុងប្រព័ន្ធរដ្ឋនៃបណ្ដាប្រទេសអឺរ៉ុបណាប្រទេសអឺរ៉ុបហើយគាត់ include ប្រទេសតូចៗទេស្អាតតែគាត់ទុកដើម្បីឲ្យគាត់ colonize ហើយ they colonize and exploit the natural resources, exploit the labor force in the colony, right, in the colony. យើងគិតទៅពួកនឹងខូចហើយខូចមែនតើណាហើយពួកនឹង corporate ហើយក្រោយសង្គ្រាម30ឆ្នាំហើយគាត់ tired, right, exhausted, right? So it's time for them to create a system, right, for European country, the way that they cooperate one another, right? To create a more a more it's just a loose original cooperation, right, at that time. And until early 18s, so particularly after the French Revolution, right? Napoleon become the emperor, right, of French. គាត់ជាអធិរាជ right, Napoleon, right, នៅក្នុងប្រទេសបារាំងចឹងចាប់ដើម invade ចាប់ដើមcontrol ចាប់ដើម dominate, right, I think large proportion of European territory, right? And Napoleon also intended to invade Russia, right? So however unfortunately, right, he lost the war, right, in Waterloo, and that many countries in Europe coming together and redefine the territory, right, territory. ចឹងក្រោយសម័យ Napoleon, right, ប្រទេសនៅអឺរ៉ុបទាំងអស់គឺចាប់ដើម redefine that territory, the boundary, and they come out with a new way, right, of diplomacy, right? So this is the emergence, right, of the law of diplomacy, the protocol, right, of diplomacy and diplomatic practices in the European country, right? And at the same time under the kind of system, what we call concert system, right? European concert system. Many European countries, many great power, they become coalition, right? They create a coalition to work with one others, as a team, to manage the regional and international affairs. ចឹងចាប់ដើមមាន team មកគេ right? ជា coalition, right, of great power. ព្រោះតែប្រទេសទាំងនោះគឺជាអ្នកដែលឈ្នះនៃសង្គ្រាម Napoleon, right? They draw the map, they create the coalition, right, of great powers. They have the way that they can work with one another, right, based on the diplomatic protocol and the other diplomatic practices, right? ចឹងអាច្បាប់ការទូតដែលយើងប្រាប់នៅក្នុងនៅបច្ចុប្បន្ននេះគឺវា develop ចេញពីឆ្នាំ1980ជាងណាឆ្នាំ1815គឺក្រោយ Congress Vienna, right? So they create a lot of, regulation. They create a lot of norm. They create a protocol, right, for diplomatic practices. រហូតដល់ ឆ្នាំ1914 ហើយយើងឃើញមាន fraction នៅក្នុងប្រទេសអឺរ៉ុបណាទោះបីជាគាត់ខំ corporate យ៉ាងណាក៏ដោយគាត់ខំ manage integration ឬក៏ manage cooperation របស់ប្រទេសអឺរ៉ុបយ៉ាងណាក៏ដោយឬក៏គាត់ប្រកាសបញ្ជាច្បាប់ការទូតច្បាប់បញ្ជា protocol ហើយដើម្បី regulate the bilateral at the multilateral relation ហើយ within Europe ក៏ណាក៏ដោយហើយរហូតដល់ឆ្នាំ1914យើងឃើញមាន fraction គឺកើតឡើងក្នុងប្រទេស Austria-Hungary right and then it split to Serbia right គឺប៉ះពាល់ទៅដល់សមាជិកនៃ coalition របស់ great powers and finally they enter right the major war right that the World War One right World War One and they competing right they kill each other right and later on winning country they push the defeated country to sign the treaty right the treaty there are so many treaty at that time right and one of the most important treaty is the Treaty of Versailles signed in the 1919 right នៅឆ្នាំ1919គឺបង្ខំឲ្យ Germany right គឺគាត់ចុះសន្ធិសញ្ញាហ្នឹងដើម្បីបញ្ចប់សង្គ្រាមហើយនឹងសន្ធិសញ្ញាទីក្រុង Versailles is the most important treaty at the time right it gave the birth to the concept of collective security right according to the Treaty of Versailles Article 10 I think you can go and download right and read by yourself Article 10 they mention collective security right collective response or collective security to aggressor right so they set that article right so that the winning country can have a collective security have collective response to the defeated country when they rearm and when they want to make the situation worse right when they become aggressor again right again ចឹងគាត់ចង់បញ្ចប់ពួកអ្នកដែលធ្វើសង្គ្រាមលោកលើកទី1ហ្នឹងហើយយើងដាក់លក្ខខណ្ឌហើយបើសិនជានៅតែបង្កសង្គ្រាមទៀត so the winning country are legally right to respond to aggressor collectively right that the concept of a collective response collective security right in the 1919 and the Treaty of Versailles also important for the creation of the League of Nations right in the 1920 ជំនកម្មបានជា League of Nations ហើយសង្គមប្រជាជាតិណាសង្គមប្រជាជាតិ based on the concept of collective security arrangement ហើយអញ្ចឹងពីឆ្នាំ1919ទៅគឺក្នុងសម័យកាល collective security system ហើយ system ហើយនៅអង្គការសហប្រជាជាតិគឺអង្គការសង្គមប្រជាជាតិហើយ League of Nations ហើយ initially was designed to serve as the organization in terms of collective security arrangement right however United Nations did not join the League of Nations because of the political debate right inside the US right inside the government in US so there are two political party right in the United States Democrat and Republican so for Democrat they want the United States right they want US to involve more in the international affair while the Republican tend to be a little bit selfish a little bit nationalist they do not want US to be part of international community right so why we join League of Nations why we need to obey the rule and the regulation or the norm set by the League of Nations yeah therefore I think under the leadership of the Republican Party right is a finally the GOP right the GOP right or Republican Party won the debate right and finally they withdrew the membership of the United States right from the League of Nations right initially right in the 1920 right 1920 yeah therefore League of Nations cannot be the organization that can provide the security collective security right to prevent the other war right from happening right happening however the League of Nations is the first intergovernmental organization in the world right chứគ្មានអង្គការណាមួយគ្មានអង្គការណាមួយដែលជាអង្គការអន្តររដ្ឋាភិបាលធំជាងគេដូច League of Nations right in 1920, right? 20. Yeah, absent, because of the absence, right, of the U.S. and some, political friction, right? Some power politics, among the major country inside the League of Nations, right? So therefore, the league was not very effective, and the Second World War happened, right, from 1939. Also, between, the the collision, right, of the Nazi and the Fascist, right? Yeah, Nazi Germany, Nazi Italy, and the collision, right, including Japan, again, the other, a country, right, in Europe and also Asia, right, Asia. So it became, a very, prolonged, a war, among, a state in the world, right? And not only in European theater, but also in the Asian theater, right? Theater. And Japan, start, involved in the World War I by dropping, the bomb, right, in Hawaii and colonizing many countries in Asia, right? So in response, U.S., produced the nuclear weapon, right, and use it, in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, right, in 1945 to end, the World War I, right? World War II, right? World War II. And that's the birth, right, of the United Nations, right, in the 1945. So learning from the past experience, right, the United Nations become more important, right, in the international affair. But it is still, inactive, right, because of the superpower, inside the, UNSC, right? Yeah, therefore regulation and also the rule, also the thing, right, discussed at the UNSC, right, cannot be, approved, right, by, two, big superpower, right? Soviet Union and United States, right? However, in the Europe, right, in European continent, right, so state and many European countries trying to, work together, right? They work and they create a lot of organization, right? Yeah, starting from, the community of oil and steel, right? ចឹងគាត់មើលទៅលើធនធានប្រេងកាតជាមួយធនធានដែកដែលជាធនធានគឺអនុញ្ញាតឲ្យប្រទេសទាំងអស់នោះគឺ rearm ហើយជាពិសេសគឺប្រទេស Germany ហើយក្នុងការផលិត អាវុធដើម្បីបង្កើតជាសង្គ្រាមមួយទៀតណា so they need to focus on oil and steel, right, in Europe, right, and gradually, therefore, neo-functionalist, explanation is more convincing. So, the low politics, right, issue, can be, is the initial, right, cooperation, right, among European countries. And later on, they develop, from the institutionalize, the organization, they institutionalize their community, right, and become, European Union, right, after the Cold War, right, and become, the supranational organization in the world, right, organization in the world. Okay, so we can see, right, how, scholars, look at the history, how they, use different, cyclical approach to explain, European, integration, right? How to explain European, informal, right, regionalism, right? From, after the Cold War, right? Yeah, after the Second World War until, at the end of Cold War, right? The Cold War. Yeah, therefore, yeah, some people, right, they don't even, find it, convincing, right, because they need to have a new way, right, of explanation, right, to look at, the Asian, right, regionalism. Okay, so I do not want to go to my observation, right? My another observation is about the other theories, such as neo-realism or structuralism, liberal pluralism, right? Pluralism, institutionalism, and constructivism, right? I don't want to go one by one, yeah, because my my assumption is that you already studied, theory, right? I have theories and approaches, in your second semester, right? ចឹងគ្នាយើងរៀន IR theory នៅក្នុង semester 1, right? No, semester 2, right? Am I right?
Yes, sir. We also study in year 2, semester 2.
Yes, year 2 semester 2, right? I think you look at many approaches, many theory, right? I think for the reason you studied, classical reason, there's so many, idea, right? So many scholar, right, inside the classical reason, right? And then, a neo-realism or structural reason, neoclassical reason, and, strategic reason or scaling reason, right? And you also study, liberalism, from economic perspective, and later on, go back to neo-realism, right? By focusing on 4 types of neo-realism, including, sociological realism, institutional realism, interdependent, right? No, institutional liberalism, Republican, right? Liberalism, institutional liberalism, and interdependent, right? Liberalism. And you can also take a look at the constructivism, right? It is one of the radical theory, right, in IR, right? IR. In addition to, Marxism, right? Marxism theory, right? Yeah, so on and so forth, right? So there are the radical theory, right? To, challenge the mainstream theory, right? In the past, right? In the past. Okay, so I don't want to go back, to one by one, yeah, because of time constraint. So, yeah, if you have any question, you can ask. And I think we will further, right, look at, the regionalism, right, in our Asia Pacific, right? So ASEAN is important, right? We will look at ASEAN and also other, institution, other, submet, other, regional grouping, right, in the Asia Pacific, right? អញ្ចឹងយើងមើលទាំងអស់គ្នាណាយើងក្រោយពីហ្នឹងយើងចាប់ផ្ដើមមាន case study ណាដើម្បីសិក្សាបន្ថែមទៀតតាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងបញ្ហាទាំងហ្នឹង and about some theoretical perspective we can apply to each case study, right? When we go to every case study, right? In the later session, right? Okay, you have any question? And now it's already 7:36, right? It's more than 2 hours now, and in the next 20 minutes you can go outside, right? Yeah, because of curfew, right? តិចច្រឡំទៅទិញទឹកក្លុកឬក៏ទិញនំប៉័ងដាក់សាច់ហើយប្រចាំគេចាប់ណាគ្នាយើង
Yes sir.
Okay.
Yes sir. Yes sir, don't worry about it sir.
ពីបាក់14ថ្ងៃគិតទៅគឺយើងខាត់ពេលវេលារៀនសូត្រណាអានេះមិនស្រួលយើងឆ្លងពីគេទៅទៀតនៅក្នុងមណ្ឌលចាក់តល័យស័កណា Be careful everyone.
I mean,
Okay, I think
I saw on the policy that like if going out to buy food to eat or they have to complete their work is fine.
Deliver is fine, right? So I think someone will deliver the food for you, right? I think it should be fine. អញ្ចឹងអាចំណុចនេះគឺគេអត់វាវេកច្បាប់គឺវាមានលុបហូលហើយគឺមិនអាច perfect បាន 100% ទេណាអញ្ចឹងគឺថាខ្លួនឯងជា deliver យើងភ្លេចខ្លួនអញ្ចឹងទៅយើងអត់បានមើលអញ្ចឹងវាពិបាកហើយអញ្ចឹងអាច្បាប់គឺ subject to explanation ហើយគាត់ត្រូវតែបញ្យល់ទៅការទៅការ justify ទៅការអីចឹងទៅណាយើងពិបាកក្នុងការនិយាយណាបើច្បាប់វាថ្មីអានឹងយើង sound familiar ហើយ unfamiliar with the curfew ហើយ Cambodia ហើយចឹងវា copy សម័យសង្គ្រាម definitely you have to stay home, right? Otherwise you will be arrested, right? អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងបច្ចុប្បន្នហ្នឹងគឺសង្គ្រាមជាមួយនឹង virus អញ្ចឹងយើងគួរប្រុងប្រយ័ត្នក្នុងកម្រិតណាមួយណាមួយ Okay, so yeah, I suggest you to read our chapter 1 again, and if you have any question you can post in our group on Telegram, or you can keep the question, right, for further discussion in the next session, right? So I give you around 30 to 40 minutes, right, for for discussion before the group presentation, right? So you have more time to talk, you have more time to discuss, right? Okay, so no comment or no question. So let me end our session today, and don't forget to continue to stay home, don't go out, right? And stay safe and have a good evening. You enjoy your dinner, right? Goodbye everyone.
Goodbye, Chair. Chair.
Bye-bye.
Wait.
Goodbye, teacher.
Chair, wait. On 15, do we have class or not, Chair?
Oh, no class at all, right? That's
Yes,
New Year,
Chair.
right? The New Year. Okay, we
Yeah.
can celebrate New Year at home, right, everyone?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye, Chair.
Goodbye,
Thank
sir.
you.